As you go deeper on the spiritual path, you come across a certain group of texts that are known as the Nididhyasana texts. Now, these texts are for those who are on the cusp of enlightenment or those who have gone beyond the pale of enlightenment. And as many of you may know, one of the greatest Nididhyasana texts that I speak about on the channel a lot is the Ashtavakra Gita. And today we'll explore a great verse on the Ashtavakra Gita. And this chapter is on the nature of the intellect. Now, a lot of people have a negative perspective of the intellect, but in Advaita Vedanta and in most non-dual schools, even in dualistic schools such as yoga, the intellect is very important. That's where we find the Sanskrit Buddhi. And so in this verse in the Ashtavakra explains the importance of the intellect and how it will take you further along the spiritual path. A man of pure intellect realizes the self, even by instruction casually imparted. A man of impure intellect is bewildered in trying to realize the self, even after inquiring throughout life. So Ashtavakra here makes a distinction between our pure intellect and an impure intellect. Now, as I mentioned before, we have to inquire into the nature of the Buddhi. Now, the Buddhi is very important within Eastern spirituality, and it is an element that a lot of people ignore on the spiritual path, particularly when they come into non-dual schools, because people might read a bad translation of some text where it says too much intellect is bad and this and that. And look, that is true to a certain degree, but if you have no Buddhi at all, then you can't inquire into the depths of the nature of these philosophies. And then you can't essentially build a scaffolding for the experiences that you are undergoing on the spiritual path. And so the irony here is the more pure your intellect is, the more pure your Buddhi is, the more it becomes expansive. Then as your Buddhi expands, you begin to understand the nature and the depth of these concepts that we find in non-dual schools, particularly when we read texts such as the Ashtavakra Gita. Then our Buddhi can understand what actually is being said. Now, this is why the cultivation of knowledge on the spiritual path is very important, and why, especially in Advaita Vedanta, a sage is often a jnani, one who is on the path of knowledge. Now, knowledge here doesn't mean just book knowledge, it means the knowledge that Atman is Brahman. So the undifferentiated consciousness is equal with the ultimate reality of existence. And so the jnani is a practitioner of jnana yoga. And so in relation to this verse, it is only those who purify their intellect through intense sadhana that can actually understand the nature of the Atman, of the undifferentiated consciousness. And so this process for one who has purified their intellect goes through 4 qualifications required on the spiritual path, and they are renunciation, so being unattached to pleasure or pain or the experience of life. Next is discrimination, so viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal. So can you see the Atman within all things, or do you see Maya? Meaning, do you measure reality according to your own conditioning? The next one is the acquisition of the 6 moral virtues, which entails sama, restraining the propensity of the mind to look outward; dhamma, restraining the external sense organs which the mind attaches itself to sense objects. The next one is uparati, which means withdrawing the self. The next one is titiksha, forbearance. The next one is samadhana, which means self-settledness. And the last of the 6 cardinal moral virtues is shraddha, which means faith in one's own Atman. And after the 6 cardinal moral virtues, the 4th qualification is one's desire for liberation. And this is an intense desire for liberation. So with these 4 qualifications, this is what purifies the intellect and actually allows the Buddhi to expand and allows the Buddhi to actually come to a deeper comprehension of what reality actually is. And as I said, this is something that a lot of people don't consider or forget, or they ignore due to poor translations, or they might be in competition with someone where they might say, oh, you're just using too much head, man, or you're thinking too much, when it is them that are thinking too much because they're analyzing what someone else is doing. Whereas the process that you are going through is just a shedding process which allows the Buddhi to actually naturally grow, which then allows you to come into contact with the nature of reality. And that's actually how a lot of these great texts came into being. They came from sages who were completely tranquil and silent, which allowed then the Buddhi to expand and grow, and then allowed them to dive deeper into the nature of their self. And then their intellect could write down these texts and verify the experiences that they were going through. Ashtavakra even says that someone of pure intellect can even understand the nature of the Atman just with some sort of instructions casually imparted. Now, this is referring to when we go into an ashram or even into a monastery, where there are some disciples that can just grasp what the guru is saying immediately, because they have purified the intellect through those four qualifications and they can understand what the guru is actually saying. Whereas the one of impure intellect takes a long, long time to come to those depths of understanding. And that's why Ashtavakra says the one of impure intellect is actually bewildered, because they don't understand the nature of the Atman. They're essentially an unqualified aspirant who misconceives and misinterprets and misunderstands the nature of the Atman. Only a purified intellect can conceive of it. And this is what Ashtavakara's point is in this verse. And that's why it's so important on the path that we do purify our intellect through those four qualifications that I mentioned. And that allows the Buddhi to expand naturally. It naturally grows of itself. It's not something that you can water and this and that. Sure, book learning can enhance your Buddhi, it can sharpen your intellect, but sometimes then what happens is, as we see in academia, it becomes all head. It becomes all head work where you're just lost in words and concepts and you don't have a felt experience. Now, in Western esotericism, they actually don't make a distinction at the higher levels between intellect and intuition, because what they actually call it is intellectual intuition. This is where you've become a whole person. And you don't have a two-part system of the mind. It works in a holistic fashion. And unfortunately, in the modern day, we live in a world where we only train the intellect, which then eclipses the intuition. But what we find with the great sacred texts of the East is it starts to harmonize those two together when you become a sincere aspirant, and you don't make the mistake of saying, oh, that's all intellect, I'm not going to read books anymore because I know something, or I am enlightened, which is the height of arrogance. There is no I who can claim enlightenment. When you hear someone claim that, then you need to kind of keep your distance from that individual, because no I can claim it, because it is not a identified experience. It is not an experience of individuality or ego. Once that I is gone, then you'll understand what enlightenment truly is. And that's what happens when we begin to purify our intellect, as Ashtavakra says. We begin to come into harmony with the true nature of the Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness that is within you and within me, which is ultimately one, which is Brahman. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.